The Jonah Project, or the Jonah Movement, is perhaps the last ditch effort, perhaps the last mass movement in America for the reconciliation of the races. Its aim is to secure the resources of this nation so that so-called minority groups can survive and thrive as independent yet interdependent people. I say interdependent because in some shape, form, or fashion, we are all dependent upon one another. But if my memory serves me correctly, I believe it was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said, and I quote, "We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We're tied in a single garment of destiny, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." He said, "For some strange reason, I can never be who I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. The rich man can never be what he ought to be until the poor man is what he ought to be." And I would like to add to that white America can never be what it ought to be until black, brown, red America is what it ought to be. I believe it to be improbable, or perhaps even impossible, to extricate the presence of so-called minority groups from the fabric of America without destroying it. America, white America, you would be like a wise and prudent doctor who deems it too dangerous to operate, to extricate, but the extrication may prove fatal. Make this abundantly clear. This is no substitute for black nationalism. For you see, I am for black nationalism as a social and political movement advocating the separation of blacks and whites. I feel that the separation of blacks and whites is not an ideal solution, but is perhaps the only realistic solution. I'm a realist. I stopped believing in Santa Claus and Tooth Fairy a long time ago. I'm a realist. America was created by white people for white people. White America has never been interested in an equal, multiracial society. I've come to the conclusion that she is perhaps too greedy to share the wealth of her nation. It has been over 57 years since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Integration has officially failed. Now there are two Americas, one black, one white, both separate and unequal. But if my memory serves me correctly, I believe it was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the black movement, who said, and I quote, that the offer of integration by the white man is a hypocritical trick designed to deceive the black people into believing that they're 400-year-old open enemies of freedom, justice, and equality are all of a sudden our friends. Hence, we're back to black nationalism, not to be confused with white nationalism. We see white nationalism espouses a pseudo-scientific false doctrine of white supremacy, coupled with an intense group such as blacks, Asians, Hispanics, members of the LGBT community. But if my memory serves me correctly, I believe it was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said, and I quote, "We, speaking of blacks, must not seek to satisfy our thirst for justice by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. For you see, I am 100% pro-black, 0% anti-anybody else. I am for black nationalism. I'm for the self-governing of black people." Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, nearing the end of his mortal life, had a major change of heart in his understanding of race relations in America as it should be. He felt that a brotherhood of races, he felt that his demonization or the devilization of the entire white race was logically fallacious. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the black Muslim movement and the Nation of Islam, which happens to be the underpinning of my philosophical and theological beliefs based in history, that the white man in America is a damnable devil incapable of being reformed, that the white man is not a devil, but the devil, that the devil is not a fictitious man in the center of the earth, a red man in the center of the earth with a red pitchfork wearing red tights. But that the white man in America, the devil incarnate. But as many who grow in their belief system or use the minister Louis Farrakhan himself as an example have moved towards a more moderate and inclusive belief system. Hence, we're back to black nationalism and my belief in the necessity of the separation of the races if the Jonah Project fails and we're left with no other alternative. If my memory serves me correctly, I believe it was the Constitution of the United States that says, and I quote, "When in the course of human event, it becomes necessary for people to dissolve the political bands that connect us to one another and to assume amongst the powers of the earth a separate and equal station, to which the laws of nature and nature's God, to declare the cause which compelled them to the separation." As an African American, I'm offended when whites suggest that we, as blacks, should be the ones to leave this country as a result of this dilemma. I ask the question, why should we, as blacks, react to leave and forsake the so-called new world that we're responsible for creating? I ask the question, why should the Native American, the indigenous people of this continent, should be asked to leave and forsake the so-called new world? Why should the Native American should only live in the hearts and minds of Americans as an afterthought, as if though they were unworthy of reclaiming their place in the sun, but to be deemed a conquered people and noble savages? I ask the question, what if good whites, if the term is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms, if given the opportunity to prove that all whites is too a fallacious concept? I'm Orapotist Maximus. I've done a lot of soul searching. I've done a lot of thinking. I've come to the conclusion that we as people, we just got to continue to press forward. Continue to press forward. But what do I know? I'm just a poet.